"General," the barbarian woman whispers your name like a prayer, but she uses the Gallic god of ruin. Titus, a kitchen slave no older than 10, shrank back as Legate Varius's hand snapped toward his ear. Quiet slave. But the general, Gnaeus Corvinus, had already heard. He stood over the rough wooden table in the campaign tent, maps smeared with dried wine and blood, the strategy for crushing the remaining northern tribes. Corvinus didn't look at the maps. He looked toward the heavily guarded cell where the captive, Lyra, was kept. She was the chieftain's daughter, an insignificant trophy of his victory. Yet Titus's small, terrified voice had echoed a profound, unsettling truth. She was the focus of his defeat. Gnaeus Corvinus, the conqueror of the Rhone, moved through the camp with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a sharpened blade. At 45, his face was a landscape of carved stone, bronze skin pulled taut over high cheekbones, eyes the color of cold obsidian, always assessing, always calculating. He was the princeps, the first among his legions, responsible for 20,000 souls, their obedience absolute, their lives expendable in the service of Rome. His morning ritual was military perfection, 3 hours before dawn, reviewing the night reports, consulting with his tribunes, examining the fortifications. His armorers brought his segmented breastplate, its brass gleaming with the image of Mars. Today, however, the routine felt brittle, a facade barely containing the churning beneath. He stood on the raised tribunal, watching the morning drill, the rhythmic thunder of caligae, sandals hitting the earth, the synchronized snap of javelins. This precision was his life, his shield against chaos. But the shield was cracking. His authority was unquestionable. A centurion paused too long adjusting his helmet. Corvinus's glance, cold and swift, was enough to send the man scrambling back into formation, heart pounding. Discipline was survival. Mercy was weakness. He had learned that lesson 30 years prior, on the bloody fields of Germania. That was the wound. He had once been Gnaeus, the eager young officer who believed in the ideals of the Republic, who married Aelia, a woman whose laugh was the sound of summer. 10 years they had shared, until the famine struck the southern provinces, driving desperate farmers into riot, and Corvinus was sent to quell the unrest. He had obeyed orders, scorched earth, zero tolerance. When he returned, Aelia was gone, lost to a sudden fever while he was away executing Rome's terrible justice. He carried not only the guilt of her absence, but the weight of the moment he chose duty over presence. He had served Rome so completely that he had nothing left to serve for. He sat in the Praetorium, dictating letters to the Senate, victories exaggerated, losses minimized, demanding more supplies and reinforcing the necessity of holding the recently conquered territory. The strategy was flawless, the words polished and dutiful, yet they tasted like ash. He was winning the war, but the cost was the final erosion of his own soul. He lived in perpetual emotional drought. When Legate Varius entered, his movements were precise, respectful, yet edged with concern. Varius was his shadow, his right hand, a man who saw the general's external power and the internal exhaustion. "General, the logistical report from Ostia is delayed, but more pressing, the Gallic prisoner, Lyra." Corvinus signed the scroll without looking up. "She is a captive, Varius, a bargaining chip, confined. She is more than that, Gnaeus. She refuses food, she refuses water. But when the medic approaches, she speaks only of the gods and of you. The men are unnerved. They say she looks through them, not at them." Corvinus finally met Varius's eyes. "Fear is useful, Varius. Let them be unnerved. A dying captive is a forgotten captive." But in his core, the small slave boy's phrase echoed, "She whispers your name like a prayer, but she uses the Gallic god of ruin." He felt a flicker of something long dormant, not desire, but dangerous curiosity. This woman, stripped of everything, was holding the line against him in a way no legion had dared. She was defying the crushing weight of his victory. The damp chill of the stone walls was the only constant companion of Lucius. He was not a slave, but a servus publicus, a state laborer assigned to the logistical underbelly of the Roman camp, primarily cleaning the latrines, maintaining the water conduits, and managing the camp's small temporary infirmary. His status afforded him only slightly more dignity than a mule and infinitely less rest. His body was a roadmap of exhaustion, stiff and permanently aching from years of lifting, scrubbing, and carrying. Lucius was small, unremarkable, his hands rough and stained with the clay and dust of the earth he served. He wore the coarse, sun-dyed tunic that marked the lowest rung of the logistical chain. His fear was a permanent low-frequency hum, fear of the centurion's boots, fear of the sudden arbitrary cruelty of the empire, fear of the cold. What he protected was not a person, but a memory kept safe beneath the layers of grime and fatigue. His daughter, Julia, had succumbed to the same fever that took so many in the city while he was drafted into forced labor on the northern frontier. He carried her memory like a warm stone in his pocket, small, smooth, and easily overlooked by others, but everything to him. He found a peculiar tragic solace in the infirmary, watching the ebb and flow of suffering. He could not save Julia, but sometimes he could fetch a clean cloth or a cup of cold water, offering a silent gesture of humanity where the empire offered only calculation. This was how he came to know Lyra. His duty involved bringing the daily meager rations to the high-security cell block, reserved for prisoners of political significance. Lyra's cell was the deepest, the coldest. The soldiers avoided it, claiming the air was thick with foreign magic. Lucius, devoid of superstition, simply saw a woman dying of defiance. She was frail now, her striking Gallic clothes torn, her long dark hair matted. But her eyes, they were startlingly clear, like mountain spring water, and they held not hate but an unbearable clarity. She never touched the bread or water he placed near the grate. One evening, Lucius heard her humming a low, wordless melody. As he turned to leave, she spoke, her voice thin but sharp, cutting through the stone and the soldiers' muffled shouts. "The general's great victory is built upon sand, servant." Lucius froze. This was treason. This was death. He believes he took the chieftain's sword, but he took the wrong thing. The sword is a tool. The oath is the power. Lucius didn't understand the cryptic message, but he understood the shift in her gaze. It wasn't defiance of Rome. It was a warning directed at Corvinus himself. She was not praying for ruin, as the kitchen boy suggested. She was stating it as fact. She knew something about the battle or the chieftain that the general, secure in his military victory, had entirely missed. Lucius felt the cold dread sink into his bones. This was not the raving of a desperate captive. This was knowledge whispered to the lowest man on the hierarchy, perhaps because she knew only he would carry it without judgment. He knew the truth was dangerous, but burying it felt like burying a bomb. He clutched the empty water flask, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was just Lucius, the scrubber, the carrier, the invisible man. How could he possibly carry the weight of an empire's error? Where are you watching from today? The intersection occurred not in the dusty heart of the camp, but in the calculated periphery. General Corvinus, seeking relief from the oppressive heat and the equally oppressive details of logistics, often walked the inner perimeter walls just after the evening trumpet. It was a habit born of restlessness and the need to assure himself that the outer defenses were impenetrable. This evening, Lucius was assigned the grueling task of clearing debris from a partially collapsed section of the aqueduct that fed the camp's central cistern. The work was wet, muddy, and entirely beneath the notice of the legionaries. Lucius moved like a shadow, pulling rubble and inspecting the joins of the clay pipes, his lantern throwing an erratic, weak light. Corvinus approached, his stride purposeful and heavy. He was flanked by 2 Praetorian guards, men of immense stature who seemed to absorb the surrounding light. Lucius, seeing the familiar outline of the general's crested helmet, flattened himself against the cold stone, striving for absolute stillness, hoping to become indistinguishable from the shadows. Corvinus did not see Lucius. He was looking upriver, toward the dense forest where the remaining Gallic resistance was rumored to be consolidating. His mind was calculating routes of attack, supply lines, and the inevitable political maneuvering in Rome once the final conquest was declared. He saw the world in terms of strategic objectives. But then the air shifted. A low, haunting sound drifted from the direction of the prison barracks, a sound that was not the expected cry of pain, nor the chant of soldiers, but the same melody Lucius had heard Lyra humming. It was mournful, ancient, and deeply alien to the Roman discipline. Corvinus stopped dead. The sound was thin, carried by the rising night wind, yet it sliced through the general's rigid self-control. It was a note of pure grief, untainted by fear. It reminded him, inexplicably, of Aelia's favorite forgotten lute song. He turned, his focus pulled from the forest line to the heart of his own camp, where the captive was held. Lucius, watching from his hiding spot by the aqueduct, saw the subtle, almost imperceptible twitch in the general's jaw. He saw the cold mask of the conqueror falter for a single, terrifying second. The general barked a low order to his guards. Increase the guard rotation around the prisoner. If she continues to disturb the peace, confine her to absolute silence. The guards acknowledged the order. Corvinus resumed his patrol, the moment of distraction gone, replaced by reinforced rigidity. But Lucius knew. The invisible woman had reached the impregnable general, and Lucius, standing ankle-deep in mud, knew the source of that sound, knew the message it carried, and knew the devastating intelligence behind the captive's defiance. The general had only heard a sound to be suppressed. Lucius had heard a call to arms. They were connected now, Corvinus by his rising irritation, Lyra by her fatalistic song, and Lucius by the terrifying knowledge that he was the only witness to the growing vulnerability of the Empire's might. Something was about to slip entirely out of control. The camp buzzed with the logistics of victory, yet Lucius could not shake the feeling of dissonance. Everyone celebrated the swift destruction of the Gallic chieftain, Brennus. Everyone, that is, except Lyra. Lucius's daily route took him through the primary supply depot, where the spoils of the recent battle were being catalogued before being sent back to Rome. The general had secured Brennus's entire treasury, a magnificent collection of bronze work, finely woven tapestries, and most importantly the chieftain's sacred regalia, items that validated Rome's superiority. But Lucius noticed the detail. A detail that Lyra's cryptic warning had suddenly illuminated. He was instructed to clean the display pedestal where Brennus's war helm rested. It was a famous artifact, forged in the shape of a snarling wolf, the symbol of Gallic defiance. Lucius carefully polished the metal. As he worked, he remembered the reports circulating among the soldiers, how Brennus had been found, lifeless, still grasping his weapon, his body riddled with javelins. A hero's end, Rome claimed. The helm, however, felt light, too light for a war relic meant to deflect heavy blows. Lucius ran his thumb along the inside of the rim. It was not solid iron beneath the bronze cladding, but a cleverly layered composite. More crucially, the inside leather lining was immaculate, stiff, and untouched by sweat or wear. It was a parade piece, a replica. He froze, the cloth slipping from his fingers. A chieftain going into a final suicidal stand would wear his true armor, his protection. Brennus had worn a decoy. The realization hit him with the force of a punch. If the helm was fake, what else was? And more pressingly, where was the real one? The real helm, the true symbol of power, would be with the man who had taken Brennus's place, the man consolidating the remaining tribes in the dark forests Corvinus so dismissively patrolled. Lyra had said, "He believes he took the chieftain's sword, but he took the wrong thing. The oath is the power." The oath was tied to the sacred regalia. If Corvinus displayed fakes, the Gallic tribes would know Rome's victory was hollow, and the true uprising would be imminent, timed for the general's moment of greatest confidence. Lucius looked around the depot. Centurions laughed, cataloguing golden rings, oblivious. They saw riches. He saw a gaping hole in Rome's defense. He was the only one who had connected the captive's whisper to the unworn leather lining of a metal hat. The fear was overwhelming. To voice this observation was to accuse the great Corvinus of being blind, of displaying a fraudulent victory. It was a treason far greater than merely helping a prisoner. It meant shattering the carefully constructed image of Rome's invincibility. He could simply wipe the sweat from the brim, finish his work, and go back to his cleaning duties. He would survive. He would stay invisible. Julia was gone. He had nothing left to lose but his simple, exhausted life. But then he remembered Lyra's eyes, the clear, unforgiving look of someone who had chosen truth over life. If he stayed silent, thousands would die when the reorganized Gallic forces struck the unsuspecting camp. Corvinus's arrogance, built on this fraudulent victory, would be their doom. Lucius's choice was not between obedience and defiance. It was between survival and decency. He placed the lightweight helm back on the pedestal, his decision a cold, hard knot in his gut. He had to act. He had to interrupt the smooth, deadly flow of the Empire's mistake. Lucius knew he could not confront General Corvinus directly. A low-status service approaching the princeps with accusations of strategic blindness would be flogged or executed before he spoke 5 words. He needed an intermediary, someone with access to the general's ear, but also someone whose loyalty was to the truth, not just rank. Legate Varius, the general's trusted deputy, was the only possibility. The opportunity came during the evening meal. Varius, meticulous even in dining, preferred to eat alone in his small command tent, reviewing documents. Lucius had the job of retrieving the used pewter plates and cups. Lucius timed his entrance perfectly, carrying the basket of soiled tableware. Varius was reading a dispatch, his brow furrowed. Lucius entered, moving swiftly to the table. As he swept the utensils, his voice was barely a whisper, pitched low enough to be mistaken for the scraping of metal against ceramic. Legate Varius, the general's victory is incomplete. Varius froze, his hand tightening on the scroll. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, lifted slowly to meet Lucius's frantic gaze. Speak plainly, laborer. You have crossed a dangerous line. Lucius did not look at the legate's face. He focused on the dirt beneath his fingernails. The Gallic helm, legate. The one displayed in the depot. I cleaned it. It is a fake, a replica for parade. The chieftain Brennus did not die wearing his true symbol of power. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the distant sounds of the military camp. Varius analyzed Lucius, the trembling hands, the genuine terror, but also the unflinching conviction in his eyes. This was not ambition. This was desperation. "How do you know this?" Varius demanded, his voice dangerously low. "The interior leather is new, unworn, and it is too light for war steel. It is meant to deceive Rome. If the symbol of the oath remains free, the tribes will rally. They wait for Rome to celebrate too early." Lucius paused, swallowing the copper taste of fear. "The captive, Lyra, warned me. She said the general took the sword, but the oath is the power." Varius stood up, his height dominating the small tent. He took a single, slow step toward Lucius. To reveal the source, the prisoner, was another act of immense risk, linking the lowly servant to the forbidden captive. "If you are wrong, I will personally ensure your death is slow, Lucius. If you are right, you have given the general an impossible choice." Varius did not dismiss him. He merely stared, recognizing that this small, terrified man held the fate of the entire legion in his muddy hands. Lucius had offered not a theory, but a verifiable fact born of close proximity and careful observation, qualities overlooked by the high-ranking officers. The story was now irrevocably changed. The danger was no longer outside the walls, but inside the general's own tent, rooted in the fraudulence of his celebrated triumph. Varius signaled to his personal guard outside the tent door. Lucius was ushered away, not to freedom, but to a hidden holding area. His courage had earned him isolation, and the terrifying possibility of either execution or immense temporary favor. He had spoken the truth, and now he waited for the Empire to decide his worth. Varius did not sleep. He went directly to General Corvinus's tent, breaching the rigid protocols of late-night summons. Corvinus, already awake and writing, looked up, his expression a cold mask of displeasure at the interruption. "Varius, the hour demands silence, not alarm." "General," Varius stated, dispensing with ceremony, "the captive Lyra is central to our current crisis. Your victory over Brennus is built on a lie." Corvinus stood, his towering shadow falling across the oil lamp. "Explain this treasonous nonsense." Varius related Lucius's testimony, the unworn helm, the captive's cryptic warning, the implication of the chieftain's deception. He spoke quickly, factually, leaving out the small laborer's fear, focusing only on the data. Corvinus listened without interrupting, his face tightening. When Varius finished, the general did not rage, he moved. He ordered a legionary cohort to secure the depot and immediately brought the fake helm to his tent. He examined it himself, his trained professional hands confirming the laborer's meticulous observation. The weight was wrong. The craftsmanship, though superb, lacked the dense and deep scratches of a true war relic. "The fool," Corvinus muttered, referring not to the chieftain, but to himself. He had seen what he wanted to see, the symbol of his complete dominance. The Senate would receive news of the helm's arrival in Rome in days. If the enemy struck now, using the true standard, the political humiliation would destroy him, overshadowing the military disaster. "Varius, execute the following immediately. Silence the servant Lucius. Isolate him, protect him, but no one is to know what he saw, and bring the captive here. Now." Corvinus's mind raced. If the tribes were regrouping, they would attack the supply lines, perhaps the weakest point in the massive campaign. He was vulnerable, complacent in his false security. He had to know the truth of the Gallic strategy, and only Lyra, the chieftain's daughter, could provide it. When the guards dragged Lyra into the tent, she stumbled, weakened by days of fasting, but her clear eyes never left Corvinus's. She was dirtied and defiant, a small flame against the vast Roman night. "You break my solitude, conqueror," she whispered, her voice husky. "You break my peace," Corvinus retorted, gesturing toward the counterfeit helm. "You knew this was a fraud. You allowed us this victory, knowing it was worthless." Lyra offered a thin, bitter smile. "You desired the lie, Roman. I merely gave it room to breathe. Brennus is dead, yes, but the successor, Vindex, now holds the true standard. He leads the tribes not in desperation but in organized vengeance. They will strike the southern pass at dawn, where your supply columns are weakest." Corvinus felt a cold surge of adrenaline. Dawn, hours away. If she was telling the truth, his entire forward command structure would collapse. He stared at her, assessing. Why tell him now? "Why warn the man who destroyed your people?" he demanded. "Because Vindex will slaughter every soul in this camp, Roman, and in his vengeance there is no honor, only carnage. I may be captive, but I am still the daughter of a king. I prefer the honorable enemy to the rabid opportunist." Corvinus knew he was listening to the voice of his salvation, offered by the person he had crushed. The time for political maneuvering was over. This was raw survival. He had to commit his entire force based on the word of a starving captive and an invisible laborer. The southern pass was a narrow choke point, banked by steep rocky slopes, a perfect killing ground. Corvinus, discarding his usual elaborate battle plans, deployed 3 cohorts rapidly, relying on speed and Lyra's intimate knowledge of the terrain, confirmed by rushed, silent scouting reports. The confrontation began not with the expected clash of legions, but with a horrifying silence. Corvinus stood on a ridge overlooking the pass, Lyra beside him, wrapped in a coarse Roman cloak against the pre-dawn chill. She was his oracle, his unwanted conscience. "They move through the dry riverbed, General," Lyra murmured, pointing into the gloom. "Vindex will send skirmishers up the east slope to flank your forward line. The main force will push through the pass to sever the road entirely." Corvinus watched his men position themselves according to her instructions. He felt the sickening grind of reality. His entire reputation and the lives of 20,000 Romans depended on the accuracy of his enemy's daughter. "If this is a deception, Lyra," Corvinus said, his voice level, "I will ensure your end is prolonged and painful." "You speak of pain, General, but you do not know it," she countered, turning her luminous gaze upon him. "You only know consequence. I chose to speak not for Rome, but against Vindex's desecration of our honor. He trades vengeance for life. Brennus taught me that true power is the dignity one carries into defeat, something you Romans rarely allow yourselves." The first faint light of dawn revealed the movement in the riverbed. Lyra was right. The sight of the enemy, not merely resisting but executing a sophisticated tactical maneuver, tore away the last shreds of Corvinus's arrogance. His victory had been a mirage, and his complacency had nearly cost them everything. The skirmishers appeared on the east slope, moving exactly as Lyra predicted. Corvinus gave the command, and the hidden Roman lines unleashed a barrage of javelins. The Gallic surprise was annihilated. The main confrontation exploded in the pass below. The roar of battle was overwhelming, metal against metal, shouts of dying men. Corvinus watched, directing the flow of the battle. His strategic genius undeniable, but fundamentally informed by the woman shivering at his side. He realized the core of the confrontation wasn't the physical battle, but the collapse of the Roman myth he embodied. He was Gnaeus Corvinus, the unblemished general, conqueror by right. Now he was a man saved by the mercy of his most despised enemy, exposed as vulnerable, flawed, and dependent. "The oath, General," Lyra whispered, gripping the cloak around her throat. "Vindex will carry the true helm. Look for the sign of the sun and moon." Corvinus spotted Vindex instantly, a huge warrior, his movement terrifyingly effective, wearing a helmet far more ornate and imposing than the wolf. It glinted with the true symbols of the Gallic kings. The general gave the order for the cavalry wedge to break the main line, aiming directly for the usurper. The lie had fully fallen. The truth, that victory often required acknowledging the enemy's intelligence, not just their weakness, stood brutally exposed in the swirling dust and blood of the pass. Corvinus had his true battle, and he was fighting it on borrowed time and borrowed insight. The battle at the southern pass was a brutal, focused engagement, ending just as the sun fully crested the horizon. Vindex and his forces were routed, their surprise advantage destroyed, and the true symbol of the Gallic resistance was captured. Corvinus had saved his legions, but the price was paid in shattered assumptions and profound human cost. Back at the camp, the aftermath was a quiet, grinding process. Corvinus stood in his tent, the true chieftain's helm resting on his campaign table, heavy, scarred, and undeniably real. The sheer weight of the lie he had nearly published to the world pressed down on him. Legate Varius entered, his armor stained with dust and blood. "We hold the pass, General. The supply lines are secure. Vindex is neutralized." "And the losses, Varius?" Varius recited the numbers, heavy but manageable, fewer than would have been lost in the ambush. "The servant, Lucius. He is waiting in the secure block. What is his fate?" Corvinus looked at the helm. Lucius, the invisible man, had saved the life of the general who had indirectly caused the death of his wife. The irony was a bitter draught. He is to be released from state service, given a considerable sum of silver. He is a free man, ordered to travel south and never speak of this moment to anyone. It was the only justice Corvinus could offer, not gratitude, but dignity and silence. Then there was Lyra. She had collapsed immediately after the battle's end, her reserves depleted. She was now in the infirmary, guarded, but receiving medical attention. Corvinus went to her tent. It was dimly lit. Lucius, though officially released, sat near her bedside, holding a clay bowl of broth, watching over her. When Corvinus entered, Lucius simply nodded, devoid of either fear or reverence. They were now equals, men who shared a dangerous secret. "She is weak, General," Lucius said softly. "She refused to eat for days, conserving herself. Knowing the battle would come, she spent her life forced to pay a debt to honor." Corvinus looked down at the Gallic woman. She was pale, fragile, no longer the fiery captive, but a portrait of sacrifice. He felt the cold truth of his own existence. He had spent his life accumulating power, yet he had needed the moral strength of the defeated and the courage of the discarded to survive. His power was a lonely edifice. Her honor, even in captivity, was a foundation. He had won the battle, but he had lost his ability to justify the cost. The separation was clear. Corvinus was bound to Rome, to the necessity of relentless duty and the crushing burden of command. Lyra was bound to her truth, the only thing Rome could never capture. He could not free her. Rome demanded a trophy, and her life was the currency of peace negotiations. He was obligated to hold her, even though she had saved him. The weight of his duty crushed the single moment of mercy he felt. The consequences were irreversible. Lucius would go free, carrying the haunting knowledge. Lyra would remain captive, having chosen honor over her own freedom, and Corvinus would continue to command, a man profoundly altered by the realization that his greatest triumph was rooted in the moral clarity of those he had conquered. Lucius stood outside the heavy wooden gates of the Roman camp, the official papers of his manumission crisp in his hand, a small leather pouch heavy with silver resting against his hip. He looked back once, not in regret, but in a final acknowledgement of the life he was leaving behind, a life of invisibility that had, paradoxically, offered him a moment of terrible visibility. He carried the scars of his servitude, but also the unexpected dignity of a man who had chosen to be moral when it mattered most. He was heading south, away from the military frontiers, seeking a small, forgotten patch of land where he could honor Julia's memory in quiet freedom. He was no hero, just a free man with a heavy conscience, carrying the truth of Rome's fragility. Inside the camp, months passed. The political fallout from the false helm was severe, but Corvinus, armed with the undeniable military success at the pass, managed to weather the storm. He secured the frontier and stabilized the region, earning the inevitable acclaim he had always sought. But the nature of his success had changed the man. Corvinus no longer celebrated the pomp of victory. His eyes, once hard and purely calculating, now held a shade of perpetual introspection. He was more measured in his cruelty, more precise in his justice. He never forgot that his survival was dependent on the conscience of a slave and the honor of a barbarian queen. Lyra was transferred to a luxurious but isolated villa near the city of Massilia, a high-value political prisoner awaiting exchange or decree. Corvinus ensured her safety and comfort, a silent official acknowledgement of her sacrifice. He visited her only once, months later. Before his inevitable recall to Rome, he found her standing in a sunlit garden, strong again, dressed in fine Roman linen, yet retaining the wild grace of her people. "You have won, General," she said without turning. "The frontier is yours." "I hold the territory," Corvinus corrected her, his voice low. "But I realize that power, stripped of honor, is just noise. You taught me that the truest mercy is truth, even when it costs everything." He offered her a sealed scroll. It detailed the formal treaty that would ensure the autonomy of certain Gallic settlements in exchange for peace and allegiance. It was generous, unusually so. "It is justice, not mercy," she stated, accepting the scroll. "It is my legacy," Corvinus replied. The general who decided that preserving a life of honor was more valuable than another brutal conquest. He departed, leaving her standing in the sun, a captive who had offered freedom, the freedom from self-deception, to her captor. Corvinus returned to Rome, a hardened, successful general, but inwardly transformed. He still served the empire, but now he served it with a chilling, focused morality, driven by the knowledge that even in the vastness of absolute power, one small, defiant human soul could redefine the meaning of mercy. The weight of Rome remained, but now Corvinus carried his own soul with less crushing guilt. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more epic and emotional tales like this one.